stress and anxiety are unfortunate. You know, they're unavoidable, right? They're part of our life. And it got me thinking, as Christians, we kind of live in this in-between state, if you think about it. So, you know, we live on this earth, this imperfect world, you know, but then at the same time, we're waiting on something better. We're waiting on eternity, you know. So because of this kind of divide is why I think that we are prone to the stress and anxiety of the world. But the thing is, what I want us to discuss today is how can we deal with these in a constructive manner and in a godly manner? Because, you know, um, it's not even has to do with the older we get, but if we don't learn how to at least effectively take action against these natural inclinations to stress and anxiety and whatnot, then, you know, stress really has the power to tear us down. I mean, I'm pretty sure I don't have to say that. Everyone's aware of that, right? Anxiety can really tear us down. It can tear down our families. It can tear down our jobs. It can even tear down our faith if you think about it. And that's pretty dangerous. So I want to show you, take your attention to that bird on the screen. That bird, I found it online and I thought it was super cool. That is the Maleo falcon bird. The Maleo volcano bird. This tiny little bird lives on a small island in Indonesia. And what it does is really cool. It is one of the few birds that makes its nests in volcanic soil. It's a small little bird. Notice it's very tiny. It doesn't really have sharp claws. It doesn't really have a tiny beak in order to, you know, defend itself, for example, but it makes its nest in volcanic soil right next to active volcanoes. You know, so God has created this magnificent creature, if you think about it, and he's designed it to what? To thrive in chaos. And I thought that was a pretty perfect analogy. This little guy here was created by God like you and me, and he was designed to thrive in the middle of chaos. Okay? And if you notice, the word of God says in Matthew 6, it says, look at the birds in the air. They do not sow, they don't reap, they don't store away in barns, you know, but your heavenly Father feeds them. How much more valuable are we than they, right? So let me go down here. Oh, there's my verse. I'm sorry. I'm supposed to pop it up. So many of us, especially now in this pandemic, many of us are now in positions where, you know, things that matter to us feel more uncertain. And the thing we got to understand is that number one, it is completely normal to experience all of these different emotions. It is completely okay to experience a range of emotions. The Bible talks about positive emotions. If you study the word, Galatians 5, it talks about love. It talks about kindness. What else? We have gentleness. It talks about joy as a fruits of the Spirit, you know. Then at the same time, it talks about negative emotions. If you think about it, Jesus wept, for example, for his dead friend Lazarus in John 11. It says his fire burned within him when Jesus turned over the money changer tables, when they were making God's house a marketplace, if you recall that. You know, so how do we deal with our negative emotions? That's what we're going to study. How do we deal with our negative emotions and still maintain these fruits of the Spirit? So it's okay to show discomfort. It's perfectly okay. I thought I'd like to make a point about that, you know, because accepting distress is often the quickest way to feel immediately calmer. Unlike our Jon Snow person over here, where every situation, he pretty much, you know, the people, you probably know that Stonewall, they always put up the serious face. They never show the emotion, and that's not very good. You know, it's much healthier to display emotions than hold them in. So we have unhelpful thinking, my helpful thinking pattern. And there's a researcher, Kelly McGonigal, says stress is what arises when something we care about is at stake. I thought that hit it right on the head. Stress is best understood. We're going to talk about the differences of stress and anxiety, because a lot of people, they like to put these things together and talk about how it's just one, one thing to feel. But it's important that we kind of separate them for a little bit, and it'll make sense a little bit later on. So stress, what researchers and scientists say, is best understood as the physical manifestation in the body. All right. So when you experience stress, they will attribute it to the physical manifestation, the racing heart, you know, the sweaty palms, the unsettling stomach. And the experts agree that the core component of this physical, they call it auto stress, is the perception of threat and danger. And when we perceive threat and danger, you know, our bodies will naturally respond in certain ways. Some of us will go to the good old picture like this, the fight or the flight. You know, I'm sure we've all dealt with that. Some of us, when we get stressed out, when we get those feelings, we'll turn to fight or flight. We'll either, some people, depending on your personality style and other factors, run right towards the stress. Some of us may tend, like our high turtles, our high C personalities, may tend to recluse and retreat from the stressor, you know. And both, by the way, both are harmful and both are good in certain situations. So I'm not saying that any of them are better than the other. It's just evident. And then some of us go to what's called the tend and befriend. You know, some of us, when we're under stress, instead of doing the fight or flight, the other response is usually tend to befriend. Well, what we'll do is we will, instead of reaching towards a problem, we'll reach to the third party. We'll reach out to a loved one. We'll reach out to a friend. Hopefully we'll reach out to God. Amen. That's the tend and the befriend. A little cool, interesting science I thought was pretty dope is that this little thing here, I'm not going to go into all of it, but if you notice the difference between men and women, and it isn't across the board, it's not really across the board, but it is most likely, you know, how when the responses to stress in men, the testosterone will inhibit the release of oxytocin. So men naturally are more inclined to the fight or flight, where women can be more inclined to the tend and befriend. And the only reason I bring that up is that I think it reminded me of how smart, how beautiful was God's design when he created men and women to complement each other as a team. Do you agree? You know, it's a beautiful thing. God knew exactly what he was creating and how he gave us this felt need for each other. So I thought that was pretty exciting. So now what we want to do now, let's talk about anxiety. We're going to stay in anxiety a little bit more because I feel like me, myself personally deal with that a lot more than just the personal stressors. So anxiety is commonly described as having both physical and mental symptoms, more on the mental. And the anxiety that we tend to feel is best described as our unhelpful thinking patterns other than the physical stress, you know. So it's unhelpful thinking patterns we experience when our mind fixates on the threat and uncertainty and the negativity. And this, again, this distinction is important because if there's different tools that we can talk about and that we can learn to deal with stress versus anxiety. Just like if you ask a handyman, you know, there's certain tools you use to solve one problem than you do with another, you know? So that's why we're making this little differentiation. Now, anxiety, it's important to know that anxiety can occur completely on its own. Anxiety can just pop up depending on how you're wired and how God made you. It can also occur as a response to the physical stress, or your anxiety can actually trigger more stress, and that can intensify. And that we have to be careful with. And it's important, again, to learn how to deal with this, because if our anxiety happens on our own and triggers this stress, our stress intensifies, and that can lead to what's known as panic attacks. And I don't know if any of you have dealt with panic attacks before. I have, and it is horrifying. It is completely horrifying. So let's go over a couple examples, the most common examples of anxiety. And if any of these examples that we're going to go through, if any of them resonate with you, you know, I was going to have you do the little raise your virtual hand, but again, I'm learning Zoom just like everyone else, I guess. And I can't really see hands. So if you have something to say, or if any of these resonate you, you know, consider sharing. I think it's important that we have confidentiality in here, but I also think it's important that we have vulnerability in here. Okay. So the first one is threat scanning. Has anyone ever heard of threat scanning before? No, threat scanning. Threat scanning is when your mind searches the environment for what you fear. When your mind is actively, either consciously or subconsciously rather, is actively searching your environment for what you fear. And threat scanning is often associated with your mind assigning meaning to harmless events. Okay, for example, now that we're in this pandemic, we're in the coronavirus, threat scanning for me would be constantly checking my body for coronavirus symptoms. You know, I didn't have it 30 seconds ago, but damn it, maybe I got it now. So let me go ahead and check my temperature again for that 12th time, you know. Or another big one of threat scanning, if you catch yourself checking the news every hour on the hour, you know, and we'll touch on the little media. We'll touch on the media in a little bit. So that's threat scanning. If anyone knows about threat scanning or wants to share, please go ahead. If not, I'll move on to the next one. The next common form of anxiety is called catastrophizing. Catastrophizing. My wife is raising her hand off camera, evidently. Catastrophizing. Catastrophizing is when your mind jumps to worst case scenarios immediately. That making a mountain out of a molehill, you know, that feeling. So, you know, I feel a little bit of tightness in my chest. Well, man, that must mean I have the coronavirus. So I better get my will in order because I probably got about a month to go, you know. Everything is a catastrophe. It's almost as if you are in an active search for drama, almost like a hungry dog, okay? And, you know, or also your mind can give you a mental image, like catastrophizing can take place with that mindset where you're always thinking that you're gonna lose everyone around you. You know, worst case scenario thinking, it's very bad. The next one here is called the hypothetical worry. Hypothetical worry. All right, so hypothetical worrying, we're going to do an exercise actually on this. Hypothetical worrying is important to note that worry is completely normal. It only becomes helpful when you focus excessively on hypothetical versus practical. All right, so hypothetical worries include the what if. These are these what if thoughts that we can get entrapped in sometimes. The what if thoughts, and they're typically we usually what if obsess over things that we can't control. That's important to know that. The practical worries, okay, the practical worries concern things that we actually do have control over. And those are wired in us to help us be more proactive to threats. That's actually good. So the hypothetical worry is the one where we have to look out for. So there's a point to make that if you're very uncomfortable with certainty, for me, I'll raise my hand on that one. As a turtle personality, I do not like uncertainty. People like me, I can confidently say, and friends of mine that are like me, we excel in planning. Uncertainty for us kills it. I do not like uncertainty. So I personally am more prone to hypothetical worrying, because if I don't know uncertainty, my mind is going to plan for something I can't control and it's going to get out of hand. So C-type personalities, you know, your analysts out there, keep an eye on them with that, because it can get out of control, you know. An example of that would be the other day I had to go to the grocery store, and you know, there's a 6-foot rule. So for me, for my analyst brain, I have an invisible 6-foot ruler on the floor while I walk, a virtual 6-foot ruler. And God forbid, if somebody, I'm always thinking this hypothetical situation that I'm in the grocery store and someone's going to walk 5 feet and 6 inches close to me, and that's it, I'm going to catch it. Perfect example. Hypothetical worry, hypothetical worry. So for those of you that were in the messenger chat, there was a worksheet that we put out, and you can look at it if you want. If not, I'm going to throw it on the screen. And for hypothetical worriers, this is a great exercise. I've done this one before. It's called the Spheres of Influence worksheet. And the point of this, and you can do it if you like, you can draw it. I can send you a copy of the worksheet if you want to have it. Or you can just keep it fresh in your mind. But for those of us that have hypothetical worries, it's important for us to do exercises like this. So if we're prone to it, what we do is we write down inside of our control circle of what we actually have control over. This worry that comes into our head, write down what is exactly that we can actually control. Take a few minutes, write it down. Then the next thing we want to do is outside of our control is where we write around that circle. And then it helps our conscious to be able to parse this information a whole lot better. We can think about this. Visualizing is also a great tool. However, for me, I find that writing it physically down, you know, they say a thought doesn't exist unless it is actually written out in paper, some say, is where it really helps. So then the things outside of my control with this exercise, I just slowly erase or I slowly cross away. And that helps the hypothetical worrier focus on things that are actually controllable. And therefore we can proactively respond a whole lot better. Okay. Oh, I have a little blinking light here in the chat. I did not know that. I'd like a copy, please. Yes, of course. Yeah, I will go ahead and do that. Thank you, Eunice. So here's some examples, by the way, if you do this at home. I believe this is also in the workbook. If not, I'll throw it out there. But a great example for your spheres of influence worksheet for things like within my control, my routine's in my control. Relaxation is in my control. Eating, exercising is in my control. You know, that will actually help with those auto stressors, the physical stressors we talked about. You know, seeking support, a big one, in my control. There's things like that, because think about this, if we're hypothetical worriers, we're going to be too busy thinking so much on the things we can't control because our brains are fixated on negativity. We're just naturally exhumed by these things. So by putting this out there, we'll notice outside of our control, other people's decisions. We cannot control what other people decide to do. Unfortunately, that hits hard at home, doesn't it, with relationships? It hits hard at home with our kids, with our loved ones. You know, we can't control what's said on the news, you guys. You know, we're going to talk about our information diet in a little bit. So, you know, we can't control what the government chooses to do. Things like that. I love the quote at the bottom: freedom and happiness are won by disregarding things that lie beyond our control. I thought that was really, really good. The fourth example of things we deal with is emotional reasoning. Emotional reasoning, that's a very big one. Emotional reasoning is when your mind tells you that your emotions reflect actual reality. We have to be very careful with this. Okay, because while emotions can act as helpful messengers, they really can. I'm not saying that we're denying our emotions, but remember, our emotions are very powerful, you know, and they're often pretty unreliable. For example, emotional reasoning example for me would be, I feel a little scared. I have this scared feeling, this scared emotion in my heart. That must mean I have to be in mortal danger. Emotional reasoning. Or I feel a little guilty about something, so I must have done terribly wrong. I'm a horrible person. Emotional reasoning. Okay, it's the min-max mindset. The minimum maximum mindset we have to watch out for. And then the last one is fortune telling. If anyone knows any fortune tellers, a fortune teller is when your mind interprets predictions as facts. I do that all the time. As a high analyst, I love to do research, but at the same time, I have a tendency, especially in relationships, I will predict that I know what the other person is thinking, or I will predict the outcome of something. And predicting it is not good enough. If I predict it, since I'm so highly analytical, I'm just going to assume that I'm right. And that can have devastating consequences in how we make decisions and how we respond relationally to other people. For example, I'm going to be stuck inside for the next 6 months. That's fortune telling. We have there's no guarantee on that, you know. Or my mental health, you know, I'm stuck at home here, so my mental health is surely going to get worse. So I'm most likely, I know I'm going to be on meds soon. You know, emotional reasoning. So what are some things we can do? Let's talk about the next thing. Plan your information diet. That's one thing we can do. Planning our information diet. And the one thing that I can say about this briefly is that the media is fully aware of our brains. They fully are aware that our brains are naturally built to fixate on threat. We have to understand that our brains love fixating on threat. They love fixating on uncertainty and negativity, and our brains will naturally attempt to capitalize on it if we're not intentional about it. And if you notice, most news sources, let's be honest here, are negatively biased. Yes or no? Most news sources are, especially the mainstream media, they're negatively biased, they're sensationalized, they're speculative. And why? Because they want to win your attention. They're all about the ratings. You know, it's important to be informed, but anxiety is fueled by consuming this kind of information, guys. So to reduce anxiety, one of those things we have to do is we have to be aware. We have to take control over the informational diet, you know? So the question is, which information sources are feeding your mind? But the more important question is, how often is it feeding your mind? How often is it? And if you're someone that's prone to what we were talking about, catastrophizing, it may be helpful to redirect your attention to the facts. Just saying, just throwing it out there. If you're a catastrophizing person, it may be helpful. It may even be better to reduce the anxiety. Maybe check the news source just once a day, maybe twice max. But remember, be aware of your emotions. Be aware of these range of feelings, which again, it's okay to feel. It is perfectly healthy to feel, but feeling without reacting properly and being aware, that's where the danger can occur. So here's a technique. Here's a technique. I may have talked about it earlier in the year when we were all together, when we were having our regular Sabbath school class. We went over a bunch of stuff, but I thought I'd bring it up again. It's called the think technique. We may have done this in class. The think technique, it's in that workbook. I think it's really good. So whenever you come into an anxious situation, or you have some kind of emotion like this come up, or a worrying thought or something, we need to think. First thing we need to do, we have to ask ourselves, is this true? Is this thought that is in my body right now, is it 100% true? Because if it's not, think about the facts. What are facts and what are just opinions? Think about if it's true. The next thing we need to do, is this thought helpful? Is paying attention to the thought useful to me? And is it useful to others around me at home, for example? Is this thought helpful? Is it really helping or is it hurting? The next thing, is it inspiring? Does the thought inspire me? That's a big one. Does the thought inspire me, or does it have the opposite effect? I'm not saying that we can all only have inspiring thoughts, but we have to weigh that against this, because this right here is going to mitigate and help get rid of some of these anxiety thoughts and stressors. The next thing, is it necessary? Is it important for me to focus and focus and focus on this thought that came in? And is it necessary to act on it? That's a big one. And then the last one, is it kind? Is it kind? Is the thought in my head right now, is it kind? Because if it's not, what would be a kinder thought? All right. That right there, I would say, is a proper Christian technique to think about these anxieties that may come into our heads. Okay. The other good thing in the book is called the My Distractions Activities, the I Get To list. This was pretty cool. I did it the other day. I was having a conversation with some people last week, and we got into talking about that, and it was pretty cool. It's like, yeah, we're stuck at home. It sucks. We don't know what's going to happen. It's uncertain times, but a lot of us, let's be honest, we have a lot more free time, and free time is generally going to be consumed with nothing. You think about it, we'll spend our time just binge watching Netflix or something, but the I Get To list is pretty good. So the way it works is that you write down on your paper, right now that I have more free time, I get to, and brainstorm some ideas, brainstorm some actual, things that you can do, instead of just, lazing about in the kitchen, or lazing about in the bedroom in your PJs all day, and catastrophizing, for example, or fortune telling. What opportunities does having more free time bring for you? I was talking about it the other day. Right now, in case anyone knows or needs to know, there are so many websites now that are giving away online education for free. Stuff that used to cost thousands of dollars. For those of us that may have trouble finding, some work, because I personally believe this is just a season, you guys. This is going to pass, So right now, is God giving you a time to, like Pastor Lafitte and Nelson and Brian, to reframe who you are, to reframe what you're capable of. Because when this is all over, and let's say you need to find work again, it would be great if maybe we had a new skill. Just a thought, you know? So the last thing I want to say is that we can do it. Everyone can do it. And a good important point to make is that your motivation will follow your action. And I put that there because it is not the other way around. Everyone tends to think about it backwards. Because the honest truth is that you cannot hope to wait around until you're motivated to make a change. Think about it. We generally, if left to our own vices, and if we're not intentional, and if we're not actually actionable on our thought processes, we have a tendency to wait around until we're motivated to do something. I'm going to go to the gym when I feel like going to the gym, for example. I'm going to get on that diet, or I'm going to change my eating habits when I'm motivated to do so. And that's backwards. The devil has that turned around on us. You know, if you've been inactive and feeling low for a while, you're likely going to be experiencing low motivation and energy levels. And it's habitual. It is habitual. So what assistance can we find in the fighting against these kind of habits? Do the opposite. It was a great discussion I had the other day with a buddy of mine. And they were saying, you know, oh, times are very tough now. I said, yes, I can imagine, you know, things of that nature. And it's like, you know, right now, you know, what are we doing to improve, you know, to change, you know, the things that we've always done. And I was told that, you know, well, you know, I've always lived a black and white lifestyle, where I have to be all in on something or all out on something. For example, where I have to believe 100% this way. And if I do, it has to be 0% another way. And I said, well, okay, but living black and white, that's not really as efficient as it can be. Gray was invented for a reason. So what are you going to do now that's different? Oh, well, I'm not going to do anything different because this is how I've always survived. And I said, okay, that's great. Surviving is very important. However, if you don't change up your thought processes, if you don't at least try action and see if you're motivated to continue it, you're always going to get the same results you've always had. You can't do the same thing over and over again. And then at the end of the day, consciously and subconsciously reflect to other people, you know, your grudges or your frustration on the outcome of life or outcome of circumstances when you've been doing the same 1 + 1 = 2. Does that make sense? So I just wanted to throw that out there. So more than anything, God is a God of love. I want to leave with it. He instills this in all of us by loving us at our best and at our worst, you guys. He is a God of judgment, but he's also a God who forgives. He's a God who redeems, and he only wants the best for his children. So God handles emotions in the way that we should all handle the emotions around us. The Lord is merciful. He's gracious. He's slow to anger. He's abounding in mercy, and that's how we need to be. So that is one of the little mini workshops I'm hoping will benefit, and I'm hoping will bless in the biblical online small group that's starting this coming Friday. Again, if you guys are able to join, it'd be great. It'd be great to join the discussion. It's going to be the same format as we had this whole week. My brother-in-law, Junior, Paulo, you know, he's an elder. He's a wonderful studier of theology in the university. He's studying to be a pastor, actually. And he's going to bring a lot of deep dive insight into things like this. You know, each week I'm going to go over a different personality type. For example, we'll start with the high D personality, and I'll explain all that. You know, all of us know these different personality types. We resonate with one or a couple of them. And we're going to talk about how, you know, how are we aware of how we communicate to other people? At the same time, how do we communicate with others like that personality type? What are their needs? What are their fears? what are their energies, things like that. And then we're going to bring in Junior, and Junior, amazingly, we're going to talk about how each personality type resonates with a biblical character. And also, more importantly, how did Jesus himself reflect this kind of character when he was on earth? How did he properly reflect that character?